The forest was alive with sound, yet somehow suffocatingly silent. Jason tightened the straps of his backpack and took a deep breath, staring down the narrow trailhead that wound into the trees like an unspoken dare. He had come out here with the simple goal of camping alone for the weekend, something to prove to himself after months of stress at work. The sun was low, casting long shadows between the trunks, and though it was only late afternoon, the woods already seemed darker than they should be. Jason hesitated, noticing how quickly the sounds of the highway had disappeared behind him, replaced by the crackle of unseen branches and the occasional sharp call of a distant crow. 2 miles in, the trail thinned out into an open patch of tall grass surrounded by walls of pine. The ground was uneven, scarred with what looked like faint impressions, too deep for deer, too wide for dogs. He crouched and pressed his hand against one of the tracks, the soil damp and cold beneath his palm. It looked human, but stretched unnaturally, the heel too elongated, the arch oddly shallow. Jason shook his head, convincing himself it was just erosion distorting an old footprint, but a small chill settled into his gut. He stood and forced his pace faster, hoping the movement would push away the sense that something was quietly watching from the tree line. By the time he reached a small clearing near a stream, the sun had already dipped behind the canopy, painting the woods in bruised purples and grays. Jason set up his tent, trying not to notice how quickly the light bled out of the forest. As he struck a match to light his small camping stove, the flare of fire seemed strangely loud, the crackle echoing off the trunks like the forest was amplifying every sound. He cooked in silence, but every so often he caught a faint crunch in the leaves nearby, always too distant to pinpoint, but never vanishing entirely. He turned off his lantern at one point, listening hard, but the silence afterward was worse, thick, expectant, as though the forest itself had gone still to hear what he would do next. Night brought with it a suffocating kind of darkness, the kind that seemed to press against the nylon walls of his tent. Jason lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the zippered flap just inches from his face. Every shuffle of leaves outside felt magnified. Around midnight, a low dragging sound scraped across the dirt, moving slowly past his camp. His heart leapt, and he held his breath, counting the seconds as the sound moved away, then paused, then shifted closer again. He wanted to unzip the tent, to shine his flashlight out into the woods, but his hands trembled too hard to move. When silence finally returned, he realized he had been clenching his jaw so tightly that his teeth ached. Jason barely slept, but when dawn arrived, golden light spilling into the clearing, he forced himself to believe he had just been spooked. Maybe it was an animal, an elk, a bear, anything that made more sense than the crawling thought that it had been circling his tent deliberately. He packed his things slowly, his nerves on edge, then noticed something half buried in the soil near the stream. Brushing dirt away, he revealed the corner of an old canvas sack, frayed and waterlogged. Inside, he found a strip of fabric that looked like it had once been part of a jacket, torn, stiff, and darkened with what he was almost sure was dried blood. Jason froze, the woods suddenly too quiet again, and he realized with sinking dread that this trip was not going to be the harmless escape he had imagined. Jason stood over the sack, his stomach twisting as he forced himself to step back. The fabric was brittle and foul-smelling, as though it had been left to rot for years. He couldn't bring himself to touch it again. His pulse hammered in his throat, each beat reminding him how far from safety he truly was. The woods, once a place of quiet escape, now felt suffocating, oppressive, like a great weight pressing down on him. He glanced around, every pine trunk suddenly resembling a figure lurking in the periphery. The feeling of being watched had returned, stronger now, gnawing at his nerves. He stuffed his gear back into his pack, his movements clumsy and hurried. His plan was simple: get back to the trailhead, return to his car, and leave. But as he retraced his steps along the narrow path, he noticed something strange. The forest didn't look the same as it had yesterday. Branches hung lower, the trail seemed narrower, and the light filtered in at a different angle. He checked his compass twice, reassured that he was heading north, yet each twist of the path felt unfamiliar, as if the woods were subtly rearranging themselves around him. He tried to shake the thought, telling himself fatigue was making him disoriented. After an hour, Jason stopped to drink from his canteen. That's when he noticed it, impressions in the soil, half hidden by fallen pine needles. Footprints. They were recent, pressed deep into the damp earth, and undeniably human, but not his. The stride was long, uneven, almost lurching, and they ran parallel to the trail before veering sharply into the thicker brush. Jason crouched to examine them, his throat tightening as he recognized the same elongated shape as the ones from yesterday. A part of him wanted to follow them, to prove to himself it was just a trick of erosion, but instinct screamed at him to stay on the trail. The forest grew colder as he pressed on, a chill that seemed to seep through his jacket no matter how fast he walked. His ears caught sounds now, snapping twigs, a low rustling, the faint crunch of leaves just behind him. Each time he turned, there was nothing but rows of trees swaying gently in the wind. But the noises didn't stop. They would vanish when he held his breath, only to return when he forced himself to keep moving. It was like being shadowed, matched step for step by something that refused to show itself. His hand hovered near the flashlight clipped to his pack, though daylight still lingered weakly overhead. By late afternoon, Jason's nerves were frayed. He stumbled upon another clearing, smaller than the first, and dropped his pack to catch his breath. That's when he saw it, hanging from a low branch of a pine tree, swaying slightly in the breeze, was a strip of faded cloth. It was the same material as the torn jacket piece he'd found in the sack, the edges stiff with dried stains. Beneath it, the bark was scarred with deep, jagged gouges, as if something had clawed into the trunk with deliberate rage. Jason backed away slowly, his chest tightening, his rational mind struggling to keep pace with the dread unspooling inside him. He knew now, with absolute certainty, that he was not alone out here. Jason forced himself to leave the clearing, though every step felt heavier than the last. His rational mind insisted there had to be an explanation for everything: the sack, the cloth, the prints. Maybe hunters, maybe squatters, maybe just old remnants from someone long gone. Yet deep inside, something primal warned him that he had already seen too much. The silence pressed closer, thick and unnatural, as though the forest itself was listening. He realized with a start that even the birds had gone quiet. Only the crunch of his boots filled the air, and behind that, the almost inaudible echo of another set of steps, delayed, deliberate, always matching his pace. He gripped the flashlight from his pack, keeping it in his hand even though daylight still lingered. The weight of it gave him some comfort, though he doubted it would matter if something truly dangerous was out here. After another hour of walking, he noticed the trail was deteriorating. The dirt path that should have been well-trodden seemed to blur into overgrowth, pine needles and roots swallowing the edges. Jason checked his compass again, it still pointed north. But the sinking realization hit him: he had been walking for hours, and the trailhead should have been closer by now. A cold whisper of panic threaded through his chest. As twilight thickened, Jason stopped and listened hard. This time, he didn't imagine it. Somewhere behind the treeline came a low whistle. Not the wind, not a bird. A human whistle. The sound carried only a few seconds, 3 slow notes, before vanishing into the stillness. Jason's breath caught, and he turned in a circle, flashlight raised, beam cutting across the trunks. The woods stared back, black shadows between endless pillars. His heart pounded as he whispered aloud, "Who's there?" But no answer came, just silence, heavy and suffocating, until he began to wonder if he had only imagined it. Still, the whistle echoed in his head, too sharp, too deliberate to dismiss. He pressed forward faster now, half jogging, desperate for something familiar. But with every turn, the forest seemed to tighten around him, as though funneling him deeper instead of letting him out. His legs trembled from exhaustion, his throat raw from the cold air, yet his fear pushed him onward. When he finally stumbled onto another clearing, he almost wept with relief, until he realized it wasn't the same one he had camped in. This clearing was smaller, barren of grass, the ground torn up and muddy. In the center stood a wooden post, weathered and splintering, driven into the soil at an angle. Something dangled from it, a bundle of bones strung together with wire, swaying faintly in the breeze like a macabre wind chime. Jason froze, his stomach lurching. The bones were small, too small to be from a deer or larger animal. He couldn't bring himself to step closer, but even from a distance, he saw the shape of a jaw, the delicate curve of tiny ribs. His hands shook as he lifted the flashlight higher, the beam trembling with him. The forest around the clearing seemed to lean in, darker than before, swallowing the edges of his vision. For the first time since entering the woods, Jason whispered what he had refused to admit: "I'm lost." And worse, he wasn't sure he was alone with just the trees anymore. Jason's breathing came in ragged bursts as he backed away from the grisly clearing. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but he forced himself to move quietly, careful not to snap branches beneath his boots. His mind whirled with questions he didn't want to answer. Who would leave bones tied together like ornaments? Was it a warning, a ritual, or something far worse? The woods seemed darker than they should be, though the last light of dusk still filtered weakly through the canopy. Shadows stretched unnaturally long across the ground, and each one seemed to twitch when he wasn't looking directly at it. He followed the faint outline of what he hoped was still the trail, gripping the flashlight so tightly his knuckles ached. His ears strained against the silence, waiting for the next whistle, the next rustle. But instead came something worse, a sharp crack, the unmistakable sound of a branch snapping under weight. Jason spun, flashlight beam cutting through the trees. For a split second, he thought he caught movement, a figure darting between trunks, too tall, too thin, gliding instead of stepping. The light flickered across the space where it had been, but there was nothing now. Only empty trees and the whisper of pine needles shifting in the breeze. Jason's chest tightened. He told himself it had to be a trick of the light, his imagination filling in gaps left by fear. But his legs betrayed him, pushing him forward faster, until he was nearly running. His breath puffed white in the cold air, each inhale shallow and strained. Every so often, he forced himself to stop, whip around, and scan the forest with his light. Nothing. Always nothing. Yet the sensation of being followed grew heavier with each step, as though invisible eyes pressed against the back of his neck. Eventually, he stumbled into another narrow clearing, this one bordered by tall ferns and low brush. Relief surged through him, until he realized he had been here before. The same crooked pine leaned at the edge, its bark scarred with claw-like marks. He had circled back without meaning to. His stomach dropped, bile rising in his throat. That was when he saw it again, this time clearer. Between the trees, standing motionless just beyond the beam of his flashlight, was a figure. It was tall, its outline gaunt, with shoulders too sharp, arms hanging low. Jason's light caught pale skin stretched tight, but before he could focus, the figure melted back into the darkness as if it had never been there. Jason staggered backward, nearly tripping over his own feet. He kept the flashlight aimed at the spot, waiting for something, movement, sound, anything, but the forest gave him only silence. His pulse roared in his ears, his throat dry as ash. For the first time in years, he felt like a child again, lost in the dark, powerless against the vastness pressing in. His voice cracked as he whispered, "Stay away from me." The woods swallowed his words whole, leaving him standing alone, trembling in a circle of weak light, certain now that something was hunting him in the trees. Jason's legs ached as he pushed himself through the undergrowth, ignoring the sting of branches scratching at his arms. His flashlight beam darted across the forest floor, every flicker of light convincing him something lurked just beyond his reach. He couldn't shake the image of that pale, gaunt figure. It hadn't moved like a man, hadn't felt human. The memory left his chest tight with panic. He needed to find a way out, or at least shelter, before darkness swallowed the forest entirely. His watch read just after 8, but the thick canopy made it feel like midnight already. After what felt like hours, his light caught on something unnatural among the trees, a straight line, sharp and rigid, not like the organic curves of trunks. Jason froze, heart thundering, before cautiously stepping closer. As the trees parted, he saw it, a cabin. Old and weather-beaten, its roof sagging beneath years of rot, windows smeared with grime. Relief flooded him despite the cabin's eerie appearance. It meant people had once been here. Maybe someone still was. Maybe he wasn't as alone as he thought. He approached slowly, every instinct torn between hope and dread. The front door hung crooked on rusted hinges, half open as if inviting him inside. Jason lifted the flashlight, its beam cutting across a porch littered with leaves. He hesitated at the threshold, straining to hear any signs of life. Silence. No movement, no voice, just the groaning of old wood in the wind. Finally, he pushed the door wider and stepped in. The smell hit him first, mildew, rot, and something metallic beneath it all, faint but sharp. His light revealed a single room with collapsed furniture, dust-coated shelves, and walls covered in peeling wallpaper. In the corner sat a rusted stove, its iron body blackened by years of soot. Jason's relief quickly soured. The cabin wasn't abandoned in the way he'd hoped. On the floor near the hearth, he found another sack, smaller than the one by the stream but unmistakably similar. This one was empty, crumpled as though discarded in haste, but the dark stains inside told him what it had once carried. He swallowed hard, dread curling in his stomach. His flashlight drifted upward and froze on the far wall. Carved deep into the wood were symbols, spirals, jagged lines, crude stick figures, etched over and over until the wall was more scar than surface. Some carvings were fresh, their shavings still scattered on the floor. Before Jason could make sense of it, a sound rattled through the cabin, a low creak from the porch behind him. He whipped the flashlight toward the door. For a split second, he thought he saw a shadow stretch unnaturally long across the boards, but when he blinked, it was gone. His throat tightened as he realized the truth: the figure hadn't disappeared when it melted into the trees earlier. It had been following him, step for step, waiting. And now, it knew exactly where he was. Jason slammed the cabin door shut and pressed his shoulder against it, his pulse hammering in his ears. The hinges groaned under the strain, but the door stayed in place. His flashlight beam swept frantically across the small interior, catching every jagged carving and shadow until he forced himself to breathe. He dragged a broken chair across the floor and wedged it beneath the knob, a flimsy barricade but better than nothing. For the first time all day, he allowed himself to sit, though his body trembled too violently to find comfort. The silence pressed thickly against the cabin walls, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. He pulled his pack close and fumbled for his water, drinking greedily until he felt some strength return. His mind spun in frantic circles. Who had made those carvings? What had been kept in the sacks? He tried to tell himself it was just some derelict hunter's shack, abandoned and forgotten, but deep down he knew better. The fresh cuts in the wood, the empty sack, they meant someone had been here recently. Maybe was still here now. Jason aimed his flashlight at the symbols again. The stick figures were arranged in crude scenes, figures hanging, others kneeling beneath larger ones with claw-like hands. His stomach turned, but he couldn't look away. A sudden creak snapped him back. It came from the roof above, deliberate and heavy, as though weight had shifted across the rotten boards. Jason froze, every muscle tight, the flashlight trembling in his grip. Another creak followed, closer to the center of the cabin. His eyes darted upward, half expecting the ceiling to collapse. The sound stopped, replaced by the faint drag of something along the shingles. He wanted to run, to burst out the door and take his chances in the trees, but his legs refused to move. Instead, he sat in silence, staring at the roof as dust sifted down with each careful step above him. Then came the tapping. Soft at first, like knuckles against wood, from the far wall where the carving stretched deepest. Jason's light snapped toward it, illuminating nothing but the grotesque etchings. Tap. 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 Steadier now, deliberate, moving slowly across the wall as though tracing each symbol. Jason's throat closed. Whoever, or whatever, was outside the cabin knew he was inside. It wasn't trying to break in. It was toying with him. The tapping grew louder, then stopped all at once, leaving the cabin in crushing silence. Jason's ears rang with the absence of sound, waiting for it to return, but what returned wasn't sound. It was smell. A foul stench seeped in through the cracks of the old cabin walls, thick and putrid, rotting meat, damp soil, and iron. Jason gagged, pulling his shirt over his nose, eyes watering. His flashlight flickered, dimming as though the air itself drained its strength. He scrambled to shake it back to life, panic clawing up his chest. When the beam steadied again, he nearly dropped it. The carvings on the wall had changed. Where there had been rough spirals and stick figures before, there was now one new image, fresh and raw, the outline of a man holding a flashlight, etched in frantic strokes. And it looked exactly like him. Jason stumbled backward from the wall, his flashlight quivering as the carved figure seemed to leer back at him. His breath came shallow, ragged, the cabin air too heavy to pull into his lungs. He couldn't stay here. The walls felt alive now, each groove in the wood a watchful eye. Grabbing his pack, he turned toward the door, and froze. The knob rattled. Just once. Slow, deliberate, as though someone outside was testing the flimsy barricade he had made. The chair wedged beneath it creaked under the pressure. Jason's stomach dropped, ice filling his veins that he killed the light instinctively, plunging the cabin into darkness. His ears strained, every hair on his body standing on end. The knob rattled again, harder this time, followed by a scraping sound along the doorframe, like nails dragging through rotted wood. Jason gripped the flashlight in one hand like a weapon, his other clutching a shard of broken chair leg he had snapped free. His heart thundered, threatening to give him away. Then, silence. Long, suffocating silence. He almost believed whatever it was had gone, until the window at his left shuddered with a sudden tap, the beam of his flashlight snapped on, illuminating the grime-streaked glass. At first, there was only his reflection, wide-eyed and pale. Then the reflection shifted. Behind him, faint but undeniable, stood something in the cabin's corner. Jason whipped around, light jerking across the walls. Empty. Nothing but dust and symbols. He swung the beam back toward the window, but the reflection was gone. His legs weakened, barely holding him upright. He stumbled to the center of the room, turning in frantic circles, his light darting across every surface. The sound came next, low, guttural breathing, inches away, though the cabin appeared empty. Jason's chest seized as he pressed his back against the wall, flashlight beam slicing the air. The breathing followed him, circling, sometimes behind, sometimes to the side. He swung wildly, but the beam caught nothing but empty space. Panic overtook him. He screamed, swinging the broken chair leg, striking only air and splintered wood. The breathing stopped abruptly, leaving his scream hanging raw in the stagnant air. Then the cabin door rattled violently, harder than before, shaking against its hinges. Jason had seconds to decide, stay inside this rotting box, or run into the forest where the figure waited. Neither felt survivable. His flashlight flickered again, dimming as though something unseen was drawing the power from it. He staggered toward the door, ripped the chair away, and yanked it open. Cold night air rushed in, and beyond it, endless darkness between the trees. He turned the flashlight outward, searching, then froze. Not 20 feet away, standing perfectly still between the trunks, was the figure. Pale, tall, its limbs too long, its head cocked slightly as though curious. Jason's legs carried him out the door anyway, driven by sheer terror, plunging into the forest's grasp. Branches whipped against Jason's face as he sprinted into the trees, the weak beam of his flashlight bouncing wildly. His lungs burned, each breath a ragged gasp, but he didn't dare stop. Behind him, somewhere in the forest's black belly, came the sound of pursuit, branches snapping, leaves crunching in irregular, lurching strides. Not constant, not steady, but always there when he faltered, like it was toying with the distance between them. He couldn't tell if it was one set of footsteps or many, but the rhythm was wrong, unnatural. Panic gave his legs strength he didn't know he had. The woods blurred together into an endless wall of trunks and shadows. Jason's sense of direction collapsed under the weight of fear. His compass was gone, lost when he'd burst from the cabin, and he had no trail to guide him now. All he had was the flashlight, its beam cutting short paths of clarity before the dark swallowed them again. Each time it flickered, his heart seized, terrified it would die completely. He forced himself to keep moving, until his foot caught a root and he crashed hard into the dirt. The impact knocked the wind from his lungs. The light rolled from his grip, spinning its beam across the undergrowth before settling on something ahead. At first, Jason thought his concussed mind was tricking him. But no, the beam illuminated a lantern, glowing faintly from the ground. It wasn't his, and it wasn't old. The glass was clean, the flame inside steady. He crawled forward, desperate, seizing it like a lifeline. Hope surged for the first time in hours. Someone else had to be out here. He raised the lantern high, calling hoarsely into the dark, "Hello? Please. I need help." His voice cracked, echoing weakly off the trees. No answer came. Only silence. Still, he staggered forward, clinging to the thought that the lantern meant someone nearby, someone human. Then he saw the camp. A small clearing opened ahead, lined with two tents sagging under dew and time. A campfire pit sat cold and abandoned in the center, ringed with empty cans and scraps of fabric. Relief crashed over him as he stumbled closer, until he noticed the details. The cans weren't rusted but bent inward, crushed as though by a massive hand. The tents weren't simply abandoned, they were shredded, long slashes cutting through fabric and poles. And at the edge of the fire pit lay boots. A pair, neatly side by side. Inside them were bones, still laced into place. Jason staggered back, bile rising in his throat, the lantern shaking in his hand. This wasn't rescue. This was evidence. Someone had tried to camp here before him, and whatever was following him had already found them. He spun to leave, but stopped dead. The lantern's glow had stretched farther than he realized, pushing shadows back. And now, at the very edge of the clearing, he saw them, figures. Not one, but several. Tall, pale, their limbs hanging wrong, standing perfectly still among the trees. Watching. The lantern sputtered in his hand, as if afraid of what it illuminated. Jason's grip on the lantern faltered as the figures stood unmoving at the tree line. His mind screamed at him to run, but his legs were frozen. He swung the lantern back and forth, the flickering light skimming over pale faces, or what should have been faces. Their features were wrong, stretched, smooth, as if unfinished. Empty hollows where eyes should have been, jaws that seemed too slack. The longer he stared, the more they seemed to tilt their heads in unison, as if responding to his gaze. A whimper escaped his throat before he could stop it, then one of them moved. Not with the jerking stride of an animal, but with a slow, deliberate step into the clearing. Jason stumbled back, raising the lantern higher as though its glow could ward the thing off. The figure's limbs hung too low, its shoulders unnaturally sharp beneath pale skin. It stopped at the fire pit, staring, or at least facing, directly at him. Behind it, the others began to follow, their movements synchronized, each step punctuated by the crunch of leaves. The sound echoed through the forest like a ritual drumbeat. Jason's panic broke his paralysis. He turned and ran, but the forest betrayed him. No matter which way he turned, the trees funneled him back into the same clearing. He darted into the brush, tearing through branches until his arms bled, only to stumble out again at the same fire pit, the same shredded tents, the same boots with bones still inside. The figures were always there, waiting, closer each time. His breathing grew ragged, chest heaving, as he realized the woods weren't just vast, they were trapping him, circling him back no matter which path he chose. The clearing had become a cage, and the figures were closing in. Desperation ignited a reckless courage in him. Jason seized a burning branch from the lantern, swinging it wildly at the nearest figure. The flame roared bright, scattering embers, but the thing didn't flinch. Instead, it leaned closer, its head cocking almost curiously. Jason screamed and swung harder, the branch cracking against its chest with a dull, unnatural thud. The figure staggered but did not fall. It simply straightened, tilting its head in the opposite direction, as though mocking him. Behind it, the others closed ranks, forming a jagged semicircle around the clearing. Jason's arm shook, the fire in his grip dying down to embers. His mind reeled for an escape, but every path ended in shadow and pale faces. The figures moved in closer, their elongated arms swaying like pendulums. The lantern sputtered violently, its light fading to a dim glow. For the first time, Jason knew with certainty that the woods weren't just alive, they were hungry. And he was no longer lost. He had been led here. Jason's arm trembled as the last ember died on his makeshift torch. The circle of pale figures tightened, silent, patient, their movements synchronized like a slow dance. His lantern flickered one final time before collapsing into darkness, leaving only the weak moonlight filtering through the canopy. He was alone now, stripped of every fragile barrier between him and them. His breath came in sharp sobs, his voice cracking as he screamed into the trees, "What do you want from me?" But the figures gave no answer. They didn't need to. The forest already had him. In the pale light, he saw the truth of them more clearly. Their bodies weren't fully flesh, nor fully shadow. They flickered at the edges, as though the woods themselves had sculpted them from bark, bone, and memory. Their faces shifted with each movement, sometimes smooth and blank, sometimes twisting into masks of sorrow or rage. Jason stumbled back until his spine struck the splintered post at the clearing center. The same post where the bundle of bones had once hung. The symbolism was clear now. He wasn't the first. And he wouldn't be the last. The figures lunged without sound, their pale arms reaching. Jason swung wildly, his fists striking air and bark, but cold hands closed around his wrists and throat. They weren't solid, not entirely, but their grip was strong enough to drag him down. His scream tore through the clearing, muffled as shadows pressed against his face, seeping into his skin like smoke. The world dimmed, the forest spinning above him. He kicked, clawed, begged, but the woods swallowed every sound. His vision blurred until the only thing left was the outline of those endless, faceless heads leaning close. Then, silence. The clearing stood empty again. The lantern lay cold on the ground, the tents shredded and lifeless. The forest resumed its eternal rhythm, the whisper of leaves, the distant cry of an owl, the sigh of wind through the pines. There was no trace of Jason, no struggle, no blood. Only the faint marks of boots pressed into the soil, circling the fire pit before vanishing into the dirt, as though the forest itself had erased him. By dawn, the clearing looked no different than it had the day before. The trees stood tall, patient and ancient, keeping their secrets. To the next hiker who wandered too deep, it would appear abandoned, eerie but harmless. But if they lingered long enough, if they listened carefully, they might hear faint footsteps circling behind them, or a whistle carried on the breeze. The woods did not forget, and they never released what they claimed.